as new evidence has been shared. Did he kill Abigail Williams and Libby German back in February of 2017?
And so when a jury is being impaneled, basically, it's very common for both the prosecution and defense to sort of, tip their hand a little bit and see what evidence they have, start to construct the narrative. And again, there was a gag order in this case for a long time, and that gag order was often the subject of media coverage. So I don't doubt that that is why the information did not become public before. But at the same time, I think, it's a very good way for the defense to sort of watch potential jurors' reactions as well.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, tomorrow is the day. Tomorrow is the first day of the DELPHI trial. Now, let's imagine we are attorneys for the prosecution. What stands out in this apparently damaging assertion about a hair? How could you argue against it if you wanted to hang this crime around Alan's neck? Well, let's start by looking more carefully at the information. Quote, attorneys for Richard Allen, the Indiana man accused of killing 14-year-old Libby German and 13-year-old Abigail Williams on a hiking trail in February 2017, said on Tuesday that a hair found near the victims' bodies did not match Allen, according to local news. Do you see the problem? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, if you're interested in the Amanda Knox case, I am covering the chronological unfolding of that case, the lead up to the incident at the end of this month on X. So you can head there. I'll put a link to the hashtag 17 years ago today MK and click on latest to get the latest updates in terms of that timeline. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So was the hair in the hand or was the hair in the sort of surrounding areas? How well do you know this case so far? If you have been paying attention, can you answer this question? Now, when I first heard the news about the hair found, like many of you, I automatically defaulted to wondering if Alan had an accessory. I didn't think, did someone else commit the crime? So I do think the defense have done well to throw a cat among the pigeons, to throw a spanner in the works and create doubt. And that's all they need to do. And I think they have done that. The question is, how much doubt have they created? Now, here's the problem. Again, out of context, when I heard a human hair had been found in the area, it is human, right? It is human hair. I assumed the hair had been found in the hand or on the clothing of one of the victims. In other words, that the hair was connected directly to one of the victims. Is that what we're dealing with here? Because it is quite important to get the details right. Because another report says a hair was found in Abby's hand. So we see murder victim was found with hair in her hand that does not match suspect's DNA. And then a second source says hair found at crime scene. Well, that's a little bit different. It's important to make sure of these details, so let's us make sure. And so when you look around, I think there is consensus that a hair was found in Abby's hand. Now, would you say it matters if the hair is in Abby's hand or near her? Well, I would say it matters a great deal. And I think a hair was found in Abby's hand. So this is elevated, in my opinion, to be quite significant, quite important evidence. And so that then raises the question, how much doubt does this hair bring about? Now, something like this raises doubt, but bear in mind, we're seeing it in a vacuum. It's not being cross-examined. We're not seeing it without additional context. What would additional context be? Well, on what day was this hair found? And so that context could shift perspective a great deal. I also have a hunch the defense felt they needed to do this they needed to lob something into the court of public opinion because I suspect they feel they've got some ground to catch up on. And you know what? They do. Another way of looking at this, and possibly the better way of looking at this, is that they did this in order to look at the reactions of jurors and then on that basis basically take their pick. And it's kind of giving them a little bit more of an educated guess on which people can be swayed. So someone who shows a lot of reaction when given that information, that might be the juror, a good juror for the defense. Now let's assume as prosecutors the hair is in Abby's hand, and I think it was, and also it's not Richard Allen's hair, which I think we know. So first of all, is it a long hair or a short hair? Is it a man's hair or a woman's hair? So if you weren't able to identify whose hair it is, were you at least able to say whether it's a man or a woman's hair? If it's a woman's hair, it could very well be irrelevant. Well, whose hair is it likely to be? Well, it could be Libby's hair. It could also be Kelsey, Libby's older sister. Bear in mind, Kelsey dropped the two of them off, and if Abby and Libby both were in Kelsey's car, well, a car is a very good area where you're likely to pick up a transfer like that in terms of a hair. Also, bear in mind it's winter, and so when you're wearing thick clothing, things like hairs do tend to accumulate. Of course, the hair could also belong to a CSI, an investigator, a detective, any of a host of people who had access to or trampled the crime scene. Of course, the hair could also bring in this whole argument potentially of a contaminated crime scene. We are dealing with something quite unusual, an outside crime scene, a crime scene in the wilderness. And, look at this perimeter going on endlessly. It's sort of scene that anyone could have access to. And so what also matters, as I said earlier, is when the hair was discovered there. Was it discovered right in the beginning? If so, that matters. Was it discovered later on? Well, then the evidentiary value declines. But most important, was it ever linked to anyone? If so, who? If not, why not? And that brings us to intertextuality. Now, intertextually, unidentified hair has come up in several cases. Sometimes it helps, and sometimes it hinders the prosecution. In the Lori Vallow case, one of Lori's hairs was found on the garbage bag wrapped around her son JJ's body. That obviously helped the prosecution in a big way. This turned out to be absolutely seminal evidence that Lori was likely around, at the very least, when her little boy's body was wrapped up prior to burial. In the Lacey Peterson case, a single hair that I believe to be Lacey's was found wrapped around a pair of needle-nose pliers. Guess what? That hair was never positively matched to Lacey, and Scott was convicted anyway. In the Kaylee Anthony case, a hair was found in the trunk of Casey's Pontiac Sunfire, a hair that I believe was Kaylee's, but it wasn't linked to Kaylee, and Casey was ultimately acquitted. Had that hair been 100% matched to Kaylee, Casey may well have been convicted. We also know in the Troconis trial that 5 hairs were discovered in garbage bags, which strongly suggested that Jennifer Doulos, bear in mind her body has still never been found, well, that she was no longer alive. And also that Michelle Troconis had some kind of direct involvement in covering up that crime. Now, whatever the hair evidence ends up being, it has to be weighed up against the other evidence. Personally, I think this is a super strong case against Richard Allen. And this is briefly based on the fact that he has no alibi. The unspent round, now the unspent round actually links Allen to the ground zero of the crime scene. And then also his multiple confessions. The defense are going to say he confessed under duress, but he even confessed to his wife in a jailhouse call. Now, was that under duress? If the prosecution is able to lay an additional foundation in terms of motive, for example, number 3, child porn. Now, I have to be clear about this. I'm speculating that this is going to come up. I'm predicting that this is going to come up. As far as I know, it hasn't come up. We don't know about any evidence related to this. But it is something that we would expect. If this evidence isn't there, that would certainly help the defense. If it is there, it would certainly support the prosecution. Think about it. If there's child porn on Richard Allen's computer, on his cell phone, I think it'll be exceedingly difficult for a jury not to believe Allen is a very likely candidate here. Number 4, psychological profile. Think about the more symbolic aspects, the more symbolic psychologies here, feelings of insignificance, the impression of this guy being a very nondescript individual, a person who feels himself to be invisible in his community. And that's, I think, a big reason why he was able to elude authorities. The same reason he committed the crime, I believe, is why they weren't able to catch him, ironically enough. And then also this overshadowing sense of impotency. Now, the prosecutors don't need to provide a motive, but it's hard for me not to see a very nondescript individual. I've actually stood right outside his home. I've been through Delphi as well. It's easy to imagine someone in this area feeling that they're leading a nondescript life, and as a result developing a perverted fantasy as one way of feeling potency and power in this small town existence. You also have to see Allen surrounded by other men, other officers, which seem to tower over him, to appreciate just how small he is, but more important, just how small he probably imagined himself to be or knew himself to be, and then likely how insignificant he felt vis-a-vis his fellow man. Does that make sense? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.